Welcome to another Photography Simplified video. My name is Chris, and in these videos, I do my best to simplify digital photography for you with the goal of helping you to get out and take great photos. In today's video, we're covering ND filters, what they are and how you can use them to create stunning images when you take long exposures. Let's get into it. So what is an ND filter? An ND filter is a filter that you can attach onto the front of your lens. ND stands for neutral density, which basically just means that it won't change the color of your images, just the amount of light. An ND filter works like sunglasses, limiting how much light enters the camera's lens. ND filters can be useful if you want to reduce the amount of light. For instance, this may be something you use when you want a very shallow depth of field. In other words, you're using a wide aperture, capturing a lot of light, and you're in a bright scene. If you can't get the scene how you want it to look, even with your camera settings tweaked to a very fast shutter speed and low ISO, you may want to put on an ND filter. Or you may use one to get creative long exposures, where you're going to use a long shutter speed in a bright scene where capturing the light for that long typically would blow out your image. With an ND filter, you won't have that happen. ND filters can come in different strengths. An ND filter could be variable, meaning you turn it to increase the strength. That would be a VND. I would typically recommend staying away from these if you're a beginner, because sometimes they can give cruddy results unless you get a very high-end one. And an ND filter can be fixed, meaning you buy different filters for different strength levels. By the way, if you find this video helpful, please leave a like and consider subscribing if you want to see other beginner tutorials as well. Now, as I mentioned, an ND filter can be useful when you want to get a shallow depth of field using a wide aperture in a very bright scene, for instance, or any situation where you just want to limit that light, and especially if you're taking long exposures, so something like a waterfall or a river in a bright scene. As a beginner, I learned all about long exposures and how you could create these pretty pictures of waterfalls where the water's all blurred. And I went out to do it, used a long shutter speed, only to find my images were overexposed because I needed an ND filter to limit the amount of light so I could use that long shutter speed without overexposing my image. Now, let's go over the steps of how you would use an ND filter to take long exposures. The first step that I recommend is to just take a test image properly exposed of the scene without your ND filter on, using a normal shutter speed. This will help you to get a baseline of what your settings should be to properly expose the image. Now you'll have to do some math and calculate for step 2 to know what settings to adjust your camera to for when your ND filter is on. I like to use the app PhotoPills, which has lots of helpful tools for photographers to do these calculations for me. Let's take a look. After opening PhotoPills, I'm going to click on Exposure. At the top, I can tell it what I want to calculate, which in this case will be the longer shutter speed that I'll need once my ND filter is on. I can then enter my settings from my test shot. I'll enter the aperture that I used, the shutter speed, and the ISO. Then under equivalent settings on the right, I can select the ND filter that I'm going to be using. For the example, I'm going to use an ND4 filter, which is a 2-stop filter. I'll keep my aperture and ISO the same, and then now I can see what my new shutter speeds should be, which is, in this case, 1 second. Okay, now that we know what settings we need, step 3 is to attach our ND filter to our camera's lens. I like to first put my lens into manual focus because sometimes they can struggle to shoot through the darker ND filters. Attach the filter, and now put the camera in manual mode and change to the settings we know that we need thanks to the calculations from PhotoPills, and retake the image. After doing so, here's my example shot. Another helpful thing to know is that with some cameras, you can simply put on your ND filter, shoot in live view using the exposure simulation to then adjust your settings and see how the end image may be exposed. This doesn't always work with the darker ND filters, however. By the way, if this is helpful to you, there may be more helpful content in my beginner's book, Photography Simplified. If you would like a visual beginner's guide to photography, check out my book, Photography Simplified, available in both paperback and ebook format on Amazon. The book covers topics including exposure and the exposure triangle, sharpness and focus, gear, composition, editing, and more. It even includes a list of beginner tips. There are helpful graphics to explain each of the topics that are covered in the book. I've put a lot of work into this book to include everything I wish I could have known when I started out. If you think the book could be helpful to you and haven't already, check the link in the description for more information. Last, some helpful things you might want to know is if you're using your ND filter to create beautiful long exposures, remember to use a tripod. You're likely going to be shooting very long shutter speeds, and the tripod will help to avoid camera shake or adding blurriness to your image. Another thing to know is that when you're using an ND filter, you may want to get your composition and your focus just right before putting it on. These things can be harder to do after putting on that dark filter in front of your lens. Hopefully this video has helped you, and hopefully you're excited to go out and take some awesome long exposures or something similar using an ND filter. Thanks for watching.